Buenos nachos, amigos. Welcome to Record Breakers, the fun podcast of music times goodness, where I put my finger in your face. I'm PETEY Rave, your man with no plan. Here with me, as always, my crew. Then we've got Brett.
Hola, me llamo Huey.
We've got Patrick.
Hey.
And we've got Drew.
That joke only plays to the video watchers.
Yep.
It ain't
Well
a
done,
joke.
Brett.
It's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Instead of beating
Kinda
around
like
the
my
bush,
fanny pack.
we want to hold off on doing Huey Lewis in the news. Well, too bad. I am Huey Lewis.
Yes.
You guys are the news.
Yes.
Hand me my
Here's the
saxophone.
news. The news is that we're talking about music once again. And the provider of said music this week is none other than Patrick. Patrick, what do you got for us this week?
I brought a double album because double albums are sometimes fun. Liz Phair's Exile in Guyville.
Yes. Interesting album to say the least. I'll start with Brett. Brett, what were your expectations coming into this album?
Well, I never listened to Liz Phair. I didn't really have access to this kind of music in like '93. The music, by the time that music was easily discoverable, like somewhere other than radio or TV, I was a teenager looking for exactly the opposite of girl rock. This is another one of those times where we get to spread some musical bondo to fill my my musical low spots. This is definitely something that I have never turned the steering wheel into.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what expectations did you have coming into this album?
Well, I had some expectations, unlike Brett. Like, I kind of knew what Liz Phair is about, but it's never something like I've dived really deep into. I know it's been something that for a while has been very much liked by critics, we'll say. She has been one of those people in rock music that has just sort of cemented her place. And so having not really dived into it, mostly hearing what you hear on regular rotation on rock radio and stuff like that, I was excited to sort of get into more meaty parts of what Liz Phair was.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, how would you describe this album musically? What would be the themes elements that make up this record?
So it's from 1993, but it's not. It's more on the indie side of 1993 than the alternative grunge side of 1993. It's a little bit on the lo-fi side, mostly because it was a debut recorded for a few $1,000s, on an indie label before like indie labels became fairly large. The whole, like, it's sort of vaguely a concept record in that essentially at the time Liz Phair had some conversation with someone about making music, and they were listening to Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones, and he goes, well, why don't you just make that? And she took it seriously, and like conceptually it was a like song by song reply to the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street. Musically it's super jangly guitars. Liz Phair is not the most powerful of singers, but she has kind of a unique, interesting voice, and really lyrically goes into a lot of topics that at the time were still a little taboo for a girl to talk about. I mean, very much writes songs about sex in the way guys have been allowed to write songs about sex since the 70s in popular music, but really women didn't start doing it until around this era when you had Liz Phair on one side and sort of the Riot Girl thing going on about the same time.
Mm-hmm. Brett, what would be the themes and elements that caught your attention?
Well, this is an album of it's like a stranger bearing themselves to you. It's very heavy on poetry. This isn't definitely not a an album where you're going to see technical prowess in the instrumentation. The lyrics and the vocals are definitely put up at the top. The punch comes from the message, not necessarily the groove. Vocally, this is the sound of 90s alt rock lady. It's unpolished, sometimes off pitch. It's definitely a rough cut, but with purpose. I don't think that it was that there's anything that's taken away from it. If this was more polished up, it would probably lose a little bit of what it's trying to get at. It's a long album. If you listen to it once, that'll kill a good hour of your time. But I don't think that there's too much. That when we get to breaking down the songs, there are some very different ways that the instrumentation works. There are some very interesting things that I forgot that they used to do in popular music. That there's no sproing, there's no like cowbell thing, but there are some little things that really like, wow. There was a time when people didn't do certain things all the time. There are some very 90s tropes. This isn't like an Angry at the World Strum album, but it does sort of have that strum rock. Not quite. We were talking about Liz Phair before we started this podcast. It's not quite Liz Phair strum rock, but it's got some of that going on. But it's definitely 90s.
Yeah, 90s as fuck. Drew, what would be the themes elements that caught your attention?
Well, first off, going through this record made me realize why maybe, like, when you hear critics talk about Liz Phair, it's in a very good light. The songs are well thought out, well made, and catchy. For the budget that they had, they were also pretty well produced and pieced together. Like I said, for the budget, was an indie label in Chicago. There wasn't much of a budget, but for what they had, if you know how recording works and the time period they were working in, it sounds pretty solid, I would say. And it's something that I think is cool also because that stripped down sort of lo-fi rock and roll sound. It wasn't trying to be like this multi-genre, like multifaceted sort of thing. It was just sort of a rock and roll record, a lower key most times and lower fi most times, but a rock and roll record. There was parts I read that she really pushed to have like a fuller sound to it, and I think that really is probably a better choice because it makes it a little more interesting at times. And like Pat said, at a similar time you had the riot girl notion, right? You had we're a bunch of punk rock chicks and we're gonna do punk rock things, and like it was very brash and very bold look to it. You had Liz Phair doing something that was like, yeah, no, I'm going to be a girl and I'm going to sing about these things that guys have been allowed to sing about, and I'm going to have a stiff upper lip and I'm going to look at you with a bit of a snarl and a bit down my nose. But at the same time, she could still be like in my opinion, a like sort of face of like the girl rock thing. She was a good looking woman. And she never let herself play the damsel in distress. Like she never let herself play down to that. She was like, no, I'm gonna challenge you. I'm gonna poke the bear. And I think that's kind of cool. Pat also said it's supposed to be a track by track answer. And I didn't have time with work and stuff in the way. I didn't have time to go track by track and look at it, but I'm actually kind of interested to see how that would have played out. Because that sounds like a cool idea, is to have a call and response years later.
Yeah.
That like is just there. Like that's cool.
It's some of the songs are more obvious than others, like 6 Foot One. And I hate the Rolling Stones. I'm like I don't know why.
No, I don't
It's
like
entirely
the Rolling Stones,
irrational.
you're okay.
So I don't really care. But I've also about 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, this album hit its 20th anniversary, and there were a shit ton of articles about it. And there was a really good article talking about how this sort of fit into some of the songs are more obviously answers, and it was just basically someone put the idea in her head and she got obsessed with the idea of making an answer, and it may be not lyrically an answer, but very much the pacing of the songs and the sort of way she, the way the tracks were ordered came from that.
Mm-hmm.
I am mad at the Rolling Stones. Peter, you mad at the Rolling Stones?
I ain't mad at the Rolling Stones either.
Let's go listen to the Rolling Stones.
My hate, like many things, is totally irrational.
I
probably would enjoy them more if I didn't know of the Rolling Stones as the old fucked up men that they are now, and I only knew of the Rolling Stones in like the 60s and 70s.
Listener out there, I'm talking to you. There have been times that Patrick has brought music that he loves, and there have been times that Patrick has talked about music he dislikes. Make your own thoughts, opinions.
Yeah.
We're all wrong.
I'm probably wrong.
And I am too.
Yeah. We're all wrong. So let's talk about some of the key tracks. Patrick, what would be some of the key tracks to zero in on for this album?
So it being a double album, it's got like 18 tracks, and not all of them are my favorite, but some of them I think are really, really strong. The first one I'd probably talk about is Dance of the Seven Veils. I feel like that's the first like really, really great track on this record. And it's one of the things I really like about this album and her style is the songs are usually her vocals are a little bit delicate. They're not, this is not screaming Bikini Kill Riot Girl stuff. This is like delicately sung, but the lyrics are like they have teeth. They're biting. They're very rarely nice. Like it's very, there's a lot of unhappiness that got rolled into this record. And then the track that follows that, Never Said, which I think was one of the singles. Yeah. The vocal harmonies are spot on and it really works. There's a little guitar lick in the chorus that it's one of those things that gets really repetitive in a really good way and kind of pushes the song. And just the way this song opens after how kind of like some of the dark stuff that starts the record, it's like really kind of happy sounding, at least in terms of the music. And then probably my favorite song on the record, and probably everybody's favorite song who's into this record, Fucking Run. It's just a brutal fucking song about kind of like this, young woman struggling with basically just wanting to have a normal boyfriend and not just some guy who runs out and, she wants more out of a relationship than she's getting, but it's not sung in a nice way. It's called Fucking Run. It is just, basically giving up and feeling like everything's fucked up. And it's very dark, and I love the way it ends. And then Flower, where Liz Phair talks about some real ass shit. And for every Led Zeppelin song about fucking, she answered with a song called Flower, which is basically this weird little spoken word thing about wanting to fuck some guy's brains out. And in 1993, not a lot of girls were singing about that. And now it's a lot, this, whether people now cite this as the reason they can sing, like women can sing about their sexuality in a more frank manner, they should know that a lot of that freedom, a lot of that ground was broken on this record, and specifically that song.
Brett, what would be some of the key tracks for you? What caught your attention?
All right, let's crack into this nut. All right, 6'1", the opening track. It is it's a strummy guitar track that has slightly overdriven, but it has like that Boss chorus pedal that everybody purchased when they were in the 90s and put on there, and it's got that nice chorus sound to it. The vocals are slightly rough. There's even that there's the affected vibrato tone of the singing. that was a little off, but it can be charming. That track opened up, and I was like, okay. All right. I can't. Huey Lewis can't beat these. No, Never Said. This is one of the few songs from this album that I remember seeing. Like, I don't know if it was like a karaoke night or an open stage somewhere. I've heard this song in my travels. It's a very well put together song, and it being one of the singles, I imagine that this is a track that brought a lot of people to Sam Goody to buy the album. Fucking Run is a 1990s 4-chord strum song about being afraid of becoming a lonely old maid. Those songs are rare on the Record Breakers. We'll mark that down on our checklist. Yeah, this is very rare. It's like achievement, like a little Modern Warfare 2 comes up. And Johnny Sunshine. It is a gritty triplet feel layer track. I didn't know that I was going to get into one of those, but there are a lot of these songs that wouldn't have been released on a major record label, which breaking ground for women to sing songs like this. Probably record labels not being a thing, but yeah, somehow this album has a lot of different things going on. It talks about the schnoo, which is like kind of blasé. But yeah, it was the 90s. I was a child. I don't know what things were like when I was a child. So I want to hear what Drew has to say, because he was even a child.
Yeah. Drew, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Well, I'm gonna go with 6'1". I said Stiff Upper Lip, and this song sort of has that in spades. She pushes right off the bat with that sort of tonality to who she sort of wants to build herself as, and who she is, and what she's going to be about, especially like on this record. It's you got to lead off with something strong. I'm always down for that. For some reason, the tone and the lyrics in this song, for some reason, made me want to hear a Billy Idol cover of it, and I'm not 100% sure why. Maybe it's the simple rock tone, maybe it's the sneer and the fist that it, like, that tonality has to it, but whatever it was, I'm definitely down. I'm gonna go with Girls next. Again, it's that snarl that I love, and the song was dark, it was brooding, and like it was cool. And it's one of those songs where you can sort of hear an artist, especially on like a debut record, like a big debut record, you kind of have to decide as an artist, like, what you want to be in, like the points you want to get across at a certain point. Every artist has something to say. It's how they say it and what they want to say about it, right? And this sort of tone is, in my opinion, her like doing the stand-up thing of like, look, like, girls are seen a lot as the also ran in rock and roll, and I'm not going to allow that to happen to me, and I'm cool with that. Again, it's something that I totally hold with it, Bob, as a wise man would say. And then I'm going to point out Dance of the Seven Veils. One, because the reference puts her art degree to work, which I think is brilliant. Dance of the Seven Veils is specifically a dance that is supposed to be an interpretation of biblical verse, and I forget what biblical verse it is. I believe it's John the Baptist specifically, where the lyrics sort of stem from there. But it's sort of a simple, slow song. But in my opinion, like, the lyrics sort of play this more brooding tone once you realize it's the John the Baptist story, and it's sort of playing off of that in a way, and I think that's really cool. When
get decapitated and have your head put on a platter,
all of a sudden that song takes a way different lyrical tone when you like, I think that's cool. Like, anytime like you can hide meaning in a song and then like layer that in. Like as a poet, I'm super cool with that sort of shit.
Mm-hmm. Old Salome doing a little two-step. I pulled up the Wikipedia article. Yes, some of the cool tracks, and we kind of bring it back around the horn to get some conclusive thoughts. Brett, what would be your conclusive thoughts on this album as a whole?
This is an album that is hey, it's Jaime. This is an album that is voyeuristic in quality and slightly uncomfortable. Everybody, we got a cameo appearance from Senior Science. I love that man. That completely derailed me. I'm sorry. I just love it, being a dad about things. There's a place in music for albums like these. Unfortunately, that place is not in my musical rotation. It might have hit me a little harder if I listened to this back in the day, but like this really, I can't take myself back to, buying a single and then going and paying like $35 for a CD or some shit. That's not this album's fault. It's just, it's been a long 20 some years. But if you're looking for an album that has a message, and it's one of those on the list of important, Huey Lewis do like little quotations with his fingers, albums. This is one of them. It ain't garbage.
No, she doesn't have red hair.
But it's it's definitely rough around the edges. If you're into this kind of stuff, definitely go into it. There's, even if you don't care about lyrics or message, it's still got that 90s nostalgia, like this is how indie music was made back then. You can kind of go back and be like, wow, this is what was happening when people weren't doing grunge, and grunge was about ready to die.
Indie used to mean independent music that was made on a shoestring budget. Imagine.
It wasn't a genre. It was like you were an independent musician.
It was what you were doing. Like you were an indie artist making a punk rock album, or an indie artist making a rock and roll album.
Drew, let's just derail this podcast for indie rock. Let me tell you. No.
Look, hate modern indie rock. I can go on for look, do we want to do episode whatever 0.5 of Liz Phair, Exile in Guyville of us just ranting about modern indie rock? Because I'll go into it.
Hey, you know what? The parallels, 1993 grunge and 2016 indie rock, they're probably headed the same direction. So just wait around 5 years and you'll have dubstep again or something.
Yeah, or something.
Who's got the shotgun? That's a scary thought.
We'll never know. But Drew, what would be your conclusive thoughts on this album?
On this album, this is constantly in lists of like albums of all time, whether it be like 100, 200, like whatever, right? This is always in some sort of list. The critics will always point this album and to Liz Phair in general as being something important in music, and there's a reason for it. So like I said, she has a bravado to her that is not super common, period. Let alone in women, quote unquote, right? Like, and it's sort of weird to say, right? Nowadays, there's a lot of like just women doing different music, but like it wasn't that long ago that like if you were a chick doing rock and roll music, you were seen as an also-ran. You weren't taken as seriously, and there was a seat change that let that be okay, and this was part of that because yeah, it was an indie album. Yeah, it was made on a shoestring budget, and the fidelity is not great. Yeah, but it was made in a smart way. It was well put together. It was catchy. And it was done with a snarl and an attitude of someone who was going to be taken seriously. And that, to me, is worth the price of admission.
Mm-hmm. That is for sure. That pretty much gives a was a good summation on it. Patrick, what would be your conclusive thoughts at the end of the whole album as a whole?
So this is one of those albums that, like, when they do all-time greatest records list, it's on most of them. It's considered one of the best albums of 1993, and that was a year when music was like good stuff happened, like in that era. It was an album. They made it for $3,000. This was at a time when being an independent artist, not to use the IE word, meant if you sold 20,000 records as an independent artist, it was enormous. And this sold 200,000 in 1993 on an album they made for, a couple of $1,000, using spare studio time because the people involved really wanted to see it get made. The shame of Liz Phair is that she never ever came close to matching this again. I mean, she has a couple more records. She went on to have a fairly lucrative career making music for TV and stuff, but like we never got a follow-up to Exile in Guyville that really matched its brilliance and how well it came out. And to me that really sucks because this is one of those all-time great records. And I think it's required listening as a music fan because it did break a lot of ground. I think it stands on its own as a decent record, and people should go listen to it.
Mm-hmm. It is a fascinating, really interesting album. It kind of sets up a lot of cool things and does it really well. All right, those are our thoughts on Liz Phair, Exile in Guyville. We're going to get to the main events of the evening. We get to our haiku reviews. Clap for me, everybody. Yeah! Imaginary audience.
Round of applause.
I'm doing stuff too, but you can't see it.
Yeah, you're doing underneath
not
the
on
camera.
podcast.
That's right. I was only going to go downhill from there.
Yeah, you're clapping underneath the camera. You're going to do it on camera. I don't see your leather jacket rustling. We're going to our haiku reviews. Sum it all up in poetic form. Let's see. Who's going to start? I'll start with Drew. Drew, what is your haiku?
One of the icons. Girl rock with a catchy hook and a pretty face.
Brett, what is your haiku?
Powerful, damaged, spilling it out for display, uncomfortable.
This is my haiku. Exiled in Guyville is some good indie girl rock. That about says it. Patrick, what is your haiku?
Lyrical fire in an ambitious debut, biting girl rock.
That about says it.
Hey,
Well,
if you will. That about says it for our thoughts on Exiled in Guyville, Liz Phair. Go check it out on our Spotify playlist. You can play along with Record Breakers, the home game. I gotta double check, make sure I have it that updated, which I might not. I'm sorry about that. But hopefully I will. On that Spotify playlist, you will also find next week's album, and that will be brought to you by Brett. Brett, what is next week's album? What do you got for us next week?
We're going to keep rolling on with the girl rock. Next week, we're going to bring an album by two less attractive women. No, we're listening to They Might Be Giants' album, Lincoln. Two guys and Elisa's drum machine and a little bit of fun.
There you go. So look forward to that. But that's it for us. You can, of course, find us all over the internet. Patrick is at Swagger. Brett is at Hibbity-Bibbert, HIBBI2RBIBBARD. Drew is at XJuciferX. I'm at PETEY RAVE. The show is at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com. RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com. YouTube.com/RebelliTV. iTunes, Stitcher, all the places, Pocket Casts, wherever
Audio.
your podcasts are found. Savoir Faire is everywhere.
Mon frere.
Until next time, Yosemite Cat, or what was it?
Entrez-vous, all of you.
Klondike Cat. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
Toodaloo.
Savoir Faire is
I